Warning! This episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that did and didn't make it. I'm Hilary B. Bisniaks. Listeners, today it is my absolute delight to welcome, honestly, just one of the best people in genre to the show. Jay Wolf, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much.
Absolutely. I've been following you since, way before we were friends. And
I feel like that's true on both sides, though. I feel like Twitter Mitchell's really early, or at least through tertiaries.
Mm-hmm.
Probably through Valerie Valdes, who
Almost
is
absolutely
actually
through
the best
Valerie.
person. I just follow on her coattails.
Yeah. Listeners, I've had Val on the show several times. If you haven't listened to any of those episodes, do listen to those episodes. Also listen to this episode. Listen to the whole podcast, rate and review on iTunes, 5 stars, leave a review, all that good stuff. But Jay, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been we've been talking about this for a couple of months, I feel like now. I don't know, time is fake.
Time is fake. Time is so fake.
Especially when you've got as much spice going on in your brain as either of us does.
Yes, unfortunately, it's sort of an occupational hazard. I would say that I'm one of those poster children for ADHD, but
Mm-hmm.
like it's so much more than that at the same time.
Yeah. So we are going to be talking about the Shepard in Shadow shortly. I did not think about how I was going to be alliterative when I did that, but I definitely did that on purpose. But before we talk about that, you have a little treat from your trunk to read to us. Is there anything we should know about this work before we go in?
Yeah, so I would like to preface it with the um just sort of the general gist of the thing. This is a scrap from a book that's sort of one of many pieces of something that ultimately
Mm-hmm.
isn't an actual thing.
Right.
That sort of
We know
falls
how this goes.
under, yeah, it sort of falls into I would call it the colloquial of Egan and Petrel. If you follow me on any piece of social media, I periodically post pictures of these fellows because they occupy a lot of my brain meat. But
Mm-hmm.
um, ultimately, so I started writing them in 2017 as a reaction to a book that I read and hated. I will not tell you what the book was. It was very bad. But it was somebody doing a gay romance with a premise I thought was interesting, and so I basically just stole the premise and did something better.
Sure, yeah.
Ultimately, partially I think actually because of that ADHD I was just talking about, it was one of those stories that just never really gelled. And
Mm-hmm.
so it has been hanging out in my trunk for the past 5 years while I was
Yeah.
dealing with a bunch of unwriterly stuff. And so that's the core premise is just sort of these two fellows eventually bone. I eventually they're in a long-term romantic relationship, but this is actually a piece that I used to give out at cons as a little sort of zine taster amuse-bouche kind
Oh,
of
fun.
thing. And I found it when I was like, oh shit, I have to read something. And I was like, this is actually probably a very good lead in because it deals with a bunch of things that are sort of relevant to
Mm-hmm.
any of the other things that I'm also publishing.
Right. Plus, it's got Blorbo from your book that you hated.
Yes, it's both these two are the Blorbos that I love that I made based on the
Yeah.
anti-Blorbo.
All
Uh
right. Well, ready when you are.
Alrighty. So this segment is called A Shared Secret. Prince Egan de Laurence ascended the staircase to his quarters, scowling at the dim light of the hallway. He had the distinct perception of eyes watching him, and he contemplated the shadowy creatures in the darkest recesses of the castle with a morbid humor. The castle itself was so full of eyes, so riddled with the innate sensation of being watched, that it did not immediately occur to the prince to consider whose eyes were upon him when he first detected this feeling. The remaining light scattered shadows that moved at the edges of his vision. Egan followed the curved obsidian bricks with his hands, the sharp peaks of glassy black stone at his fingertips, a centering feeling, a sense of home, as the unusual creeping sensation began to subside. Castle Blackglass had been home for many of his years, a score and seven, apart from time at court and in polishing his education. While he'd scarcely claim he'd explored the entirety of its magic-cut tile to his own satisfaction, he knew something lingered here, a radiant energy buried in stone, purest fire tempered by water and air, a magic and beautiful result, gleaming dark stone cut and polished. His study was warm, the room lined with deep wooden shelves, dark with age and polished with wax. Many of these were reserved for books and maps, but others held rarities, collected through adventures beyond the castle walls. A globe with a set of keyed teeth on its spindle played a gentle tune when spun. A pair of carved hair combs with inlaid stones glowed like witchlight. A webby shawl of spider-like lace draped over one shelf, its stitches as fine as the work of the mother of spiders herself. Small bits of finery from times and places Egan could only imagine, from long before, in the time before the rot. He pulled the globe from its resting place and set it on the polished ebon desk. As he turned it and listened to the intricate little tune it played, he surveyed the picture of the world. So many places lost to the risen sea, and so few yet remained. The hefty ironclad door to his study creaked. "My liege?" Egan startled at the sound of the mage's voice. Quiet, but unexpected while he was lost in thought. "Please come in. Petrel, is it?" Egan waved him into the room. That's what Gila calls me," Petrel agreed, and tilted his head down as he stepped inside and closed the door. Prince Egan looked him over, appraising. Slender, with wide hips for his frame, the mage's hair hung above the shoulder in an airy flyaway length, sandy brown that suited to his golden hazel eyes. His clothes fit reasonably well, for a servant. For the various colors of thread at the seams of his waistcoat, he'd done some mending to make sure this was true. He wore a clean white shirt with minimal frills under a sun-faded, embroidered burgundy waistcoat that had once been the deepest red colors of the castle banners. At the collar and sleeves, a close-fitted, dark stockinette gansey peeked out underneath. Shabby black button-front breeches, tied with a sash at the narrow waist, the extra sash fabric wrapped over those slightly wider hips. Black buttoned cat-paw boots with soft leather soles covered long, lithe calves. A misshapen, stained satchel rested at his right hip. Fawn brown leather crammed over full with tied string fabric pouches and odd, strange-looking tools visible beneath the flap. "Head Mage Gila tells me you might know how to help me." "Yes, my liege." Petrel nodded before looking him in the eye directly, his cheeks an anxious pink. "I've done lots of searching spells." He was quite attractive, Egan thought. Not suitable for a full noble partnership by any means, but possibly a nice bedwarmer if he was amenable. The poor lad seemed painfully shy. Egan caught himself examining the last edges of warm autumn light shining through the window as it played across his face. Petrel opened his satchel and sifted through the ingredients he'd need for his spell. Egan reached out absently and brushed the lad's bangs back behind his ear to get another look at those eyes, as the apprentice was lost in thought, doing a silent chant with his head tilted. Was he the one whose eyes he had felt? Petrel blanched. My liege, you shouldn't touch me." "I thought I'd seen something different about you." Egan squinted. At this, Petrel blushed hard and backed away to a footstool not far from the desk and pulled out a fist-sized mortar bowl to place the required ingredients. Egan tapped his fingers together, pacing the room, searching for the right words to explain what he needed help to find before settling on the simplest. I need help finding Sir Turris. She's several days late, and I'm worried. Do you have anything of hers I can see? Petrel asked, as he worked the mortar and pestle between his knees, grinding small bits of dried flowers Egan couldn't hope to identify.
Hmm.
An emotional object, perhaps? Egan thought for a moment. Well, I'm sure I can find something. Petrel focused on the fine greenish powder he'd made and swept it into a small, square fabric pouch. That should get us started, he said brightly. As he stood up, he stumbled over the footstool. Oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. He scrambled to stand, and Egan scrambled to help him. The mage took a firm grasp of the prince's hand as he righted himself, and then, realizing too late what he'd done, Petrel flinched and pulled his hand to his chest. The two young men stared at each other with horrified glances as they backed away from one another. What was... The prince gasped, looking away at his own hands after Petrel retracted his grip. He'd seen a flash of something incomprehensible at first. A flash of himself, standing with his hand out. A feeling like sun-warmed silk in his chest. A pleasant, rich scent like the delicate incense of the study, but cut through someone else's perception, someone whose senses were sharp enough to pick out the separate notes of sandalwood and amber and other scents that Egan couldn't possibly identify. A ghostly sense of unreality shrouded the entire scene. I can explain. Petrel gasped, nearly in tears. I told you not to... You're afraid of me. Petrel looked down at his hands. No one is supposed to know about this. Usually I can control it. He fretted and twisted his hands together. You're a diviner, a magical little spy. Egan narrowed his eyes at the mage. Who sent you? How did you hide this from everyone? Are you the one I saw watching me today? Never, Petrel replied, shell-shocked. I've avoided you. I've avoided most people, but I'm not a diviner. I'm an empath. As Egan approached him, the young man scurried toward the door in a panic. Please, I beg you, don't. But Egan grasped Petrel's hand again, and another warm flash came to him. The smell of sweat, the tang of a bitten lip, a gripping terror, a base bodily fear for his life. No, for Petrel's life. That was it, the empathic link. Petrel felt what others felt and transmitted his own feelings, made them known, showed them to someone else clear as day, without even trying in this case. No wonder this was such a dangerous power. What he'd experienced with certainty weren't his own feelings at all. It was clear these were incredibly strong abilities, and it wasn't clear how much control Petrel had over the effects. Did he have any control over it at all? At the same time, there was another sensation embedded there, one Egan hadn't expected. A tiny, bright flash of hope, of wanting. No. Desire. Egan suspected of anything he'd been shown, it was this feeling above all that Petrel meant to keep hidden. He leaned closer, felt the tension as he leaned in, as he pressed the mage to the door. You're certain no one knows? You weren't sent to spy on me? I swear to you. I swear to you, my liege. Petrel's words were paced with deep breaths and terror. Egan slid his hand into Petrel's and pressed his fingers apart, pinned him by his arm against the creaky door. The young man's slender fingers between his own resisted only enough to suggest that Petrel welcomed the opportunity to be seen. The young man currently at his mercy was curious about him, too. Egan felt the word if thoroughly laced through his imagination, dreamlike and constant, as he held Petrel against the door by his fist. Petrel liked both whelks and oysters, as the folk saying went, and suspected it was the same for the prince. He knew the courtly rumors about Egan's many dalliances. The mage had seen the prince around the castle how many times? His beautiful, chiseled, olivine features and deep brown eyes framed by his long, plum-dark mane. An overly rosy, optimistic reflection of himself. Like what another young man imagined a prince to resemble from a distance. Romanticized, with the pearly haze of a long-burning crush. Had he? Yes. Petrel fancied him to his utter horror and shame at being found out. In this dream space, Egan discovered himself outside of his own context. Exhilarating, dangerous, enchanting, deliciously and utterly wrong. In this liminal space, Egan felt Petrel wondering if the prince had soft lips like his own, thoughts of how nice it might feel if they both wanted to kiss and touch. Oh, if only. Thoughts of how close he stood, how the prince pressed him to the door. The mage's dream self soon changed directions in fear. Was he merely a plaything for the prince then? And yet, Petrel wondered, how different was it to serve someone handsome and quiet and kind? Was he? Did Petrel dare to hope? The initial shock gave way to a new feeling beneath Egan's hand. Relief. The immediate fear subsided. For all that this power was forbidden, for all that he understood already how manipulative it was, how clearly strong and clearly dangerous, Egan was drawn to it, and to Petrel. Regretting his clear violation of the mage's personal space, he released Petrel's hand. The mage stood shaking, fearful, and Egan plunged into deep remorse. Well, now you know, Petrel said, his voice trembling as forcefully as his shoulders. Egan offered his arms out, and Petrel gave him a questioning glance, but leaned into the prince's embrace. How much of that was real? What do you mean, real? Petrel asked. Egan leaned against him, not quite ready to let go. The delicious tension of hesitation and danger still humming against his ribs. It's hard to say what's real when it's all in my head, or yours for that matter, but it is true as I understand it. I don't know how to explain some of it. It's difficult. You asked me a question. Several. At once, Egan said. The empath's voice wavered, and he began to talk faster, his voice ticking upward with anxiety. I saw you liked the idea of kissing me as much as I did. Terrifying and humiliating though that was, you see me much more clearly than any of the others. Yes, Egan agreed. I can't deny I liked what I saw. He reached out, put his hand over Petrel's arm, felt him tremble and shy away, now that the first waves of emotion had passed. Petrel was different from the others, but it seemed clear to Egan, even after only a few minutes, that whatever this power was, if Petrel had intended to use it against him, he wouldn't be nearly so frightened. He finally stopped trembling when Egan reached out again, more gently. He did not resist the touch on his shoulder, and his breathing evened out. The prince struggled to put it into words. I've never met someone who intrigues me like you do. So you're not going to hurt me. You're not going to stop me. You're not going to turn me over. I gave you my word, Egan said. I'm certain I can use your help. Yes, my liege, Petrel replied. Even when his expression brightened, the poor lad always looked slightly nervous. No wonder. With a secret like that, it wouldn't take much at all for him to lose everything. Now they were both linked by Petrel's hidden ability, and Egan hoped they'd be able to help each other, no matter who else they had to hide it from. And scene.
Gay! Oh, delightful. The
This is like,
opening the
sorry.
opening line was really giving Gormenghast for me. I can't quite explain it, but
Oh no, that's delight. I'm so happy you said that, actually. That's very much what I was aiming for in terms of tone. Like,
excellent.
especially like it's so funny because when you write a book for like multiple years, like the like origination point very much changes place.
Mm-hmm.
So like the tone was definitely a lot more Gormenghasty, gothic horror-y, and it evolved to be slightly more sword and sorcery-ish, but like with a slightly more there's like a tinge of grimdarky kind of shit going on, but it's not really I would hesitate to call it a grimdark series by any means.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like romantic fantasy, but a very specific kind.
Right. Ah.
And ultimately, so these poor fellows are in the trunk for now. But that sort of
I,
leads into what we're hopefully going to talk about here next,
yeah. I
which
I
is
love seeing those two boys show up on my feed.
I love them too, and they're it's very funny, but like basically the progress that I have gone through as a writer with them has very much been like, okay, the story starts before this. Actually, it starts earlier than this.
Uh-huh.
And then it starts even earlier than this. And like, so I'm at the point now where they're sort of like the third age of the world that I'm writing in. Like, it started out that they were originally going to be like, I was just writing this very like indulgent sword and sorcery slash grimdark slash gothic
Mm-hmm.
horror nonsense. It was just very like, all right, it's basically just these two figuring out their bullshit. Um, there's lots of it, fortunately. But the world that they live in is actually they live in a place that I generally refer to as the Rot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's of course a capital R Rot because it's fantasy.
Of course, yeah.
But the Rot is basically like, what if magic was pollution?
Mm.
Um, and so like they live in this world where there's magic that has collapsed upon them and is effectively rotting around them
Mm-hmm.
and has created this sprawling environment of disaster and chaos that is has like little bastions of security, of which Castle Blackglass is one of them.
Right.
And
We love to see
so,
it.
yes, it's like a really specific. Um, I feel like it's a really specific vibe, but like that's there. But so then at one point I was like writing another story entirely, and I
Mm-hmm.
realized it was the story of how the rock came to be.
Oh.
And so it was like, oh crap. Okay, so like I guess this story comes first and then the rock comes after that. And that is my also long sprawling, long suffering 5 years ago draft of a book that's called Amaranthine. And
Mm.
that one is I was hoping to get back to that, but something else preempted it.
As happens.
So last summer I did a project called the Inkfort Press Self-Publishing Derby.
Mm-hmm.
And basically that project is you pick a book cover with an anonymous like nom de guerre on the on like already included. So
Mm-hmm.
they sort of have like a ranking system. You can like pick out a few covers that you like and you'd be willing to write for, and you send them into them, and they determine through little mathy things which one you get. And I got the one that extremely wanted.
Oh,
And
nice.
that is I felt I was like so lucky.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the book that became Bringer of the Scourge, which
Mm-hmm.
is actually the title that I got from the Derby, and I have kept the nom de guerre that I was assigned, which is
Perfect.
M. Daniel McDowell.
I
So
mean, honestly, like, coming up with titles and coming up with a pen name, two of the worst things to try to do.
it's
IMO.
it's hard. Like trying to come up with a pen name is really hard, and like this particular one was interesting. So like they had a rule in the Derby this year that like certain covers you were allowed to like submit slight alterations to the name.
Mm-hmm.
And so like in the case of Bringer of the Scourge, the original author name on the book was Daniel McDowell.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's a great name. there are at least two other epic fantasy authors with the name Daniel McDowell. So I was
Uh,
like, all right, this is a problem. I have to change it just a little bit so that I have any chance at socials that aren't McDowell 9 digits. Like,
uh,
so, so I was like, okay, so if I put one initial in front of that, it cleared everything. All the names
uh,
were available. So I was like, all right, I'm M. Daniel McDowell.
perfect.
And I actually really like it. It's one of those things where while I was writing, I sort of because I was also newslettering as M to sort of like
Hmm.
have a thing to do every week that I could kind of like report on my progress and stuff. And as M, I got really into it and I was like, "Oh, it's nice to have just an author persona." It's really
Uh,
nice to have a part of my life that's not like an author and an editor and a publisher and a like podcaster and like
yeah.
all of the other like stupid little things that I do. Illustrator was in there. Although I did a couple of illustrations for the book during the thing, and yeah, that was kind of interesting to like hide my style while I was doing the
Uh,
derby because I had to be anonymous. So
hmm.
I had to sign all of my stuff with a name that's not mine, and it actually worked surprisingly well. Like my mother was like, "Who drew this McDowell thing?" I was like, "Oh, that was actually me. It's okay." but but she was very surprised by it. So I was like, like putting a signature on something that's not your own name will like it'll thwart a surprising number of people from ever figuring out it's you.
Uh-huh. I cannot. I'm playing a play by post game with one of my friends right now, and I love the character that I'm playing very dearly, and I cannot sign their name for the life of
Oh,
me.
that's so buck wild. I love it. It's like they really are a person.
They're
It's
a
a
real
separate person.
person. They're awful. Let me tell you, they are the worst. I love
That's
them
kind of the
so
best though.
much.
That's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of play by post.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
yeah, so
so,
anyways, sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I did end up with Bringer of the Scourge. It turned out that I was sort of like, okay, but what if this is the thing that goes in front of Amaranth?
Mm-hmm.
And so now I have a like 3 generation snowball before I'm gonna really get back to Egan and Petrel. And I feel really bad for those poor boys, but I feel like I'll be a better writer when I get back to them. So I feel confident that it's gonna be a little bit less it's gonna be a little more subtle than maybe like what we've just encountered today.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's all doing the work.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
So speaking of Bring of the Scourge and its sequel, The Shepherd in Shadow, which will be out shortly,
Yes.
uh, I would love to know, uh, because of course this is Tales from the Trunk, are
Hmm.
there any parts that just did not make it into either the first book or this sequel that are just and I include the first book because I know sometimes
Oh yeah, this is
have to leave something out of the first book and then you're like, "Oh, but I can put it in the sequel right here. It works out perfectly." Uh so any part that you're just, broken up over still that has not made it in.
Oh, that's a really good question. And the answer is like I don't think so, at least not yet. I'm still in the
Nice.
process of like cutting together because my process is so like as we have addressed earlier several times, and I will continue to address. I have pretty severe ADHD, and so like my process of writing a book is basically like I write many little chunks in my phone notebook,
Mhm.
and then I start to string them together, and I have to like assemble them over time and like by porting them into my Word document like piece by piece.
Right.
And most of the time, like when I jettison something, it's usually just sort of like, oh, I wasn't really thinking clearly about that particular thing. Maybe I need to rethink it.
Mhm.
But there is some stuff actually when I think about it on reflection. So like the premise of Bringer of the Scourge is this warrior princess who's very visible on the cover of the book, very
Mhm.
beautiful as soon as I saw that character on the cover, I was like, this is the cover I desperately want to have for Derby. I want her very badly. She just like speaks to me. She has like a
Mm-hmm.
very like her it's funny because like the expression on the character's face is very she's like it's like a piece from a stock artist whose name escapes me at the moment, but basically they usually just take a piece of stock and put like some nice like logo type lettering over it, and that's how they do
Mm-hmm.
the Derby covers. But so I this particular character is like she's wearing like Elizabethan cawls in her hair, like she has a like Elizabethan frill, and she has this
Mm-hmm.
very like calm but determined look on her face. Like you look at her and you just know like you should not cross her.
Uh-huh.
Like you like this will not go well. And like contrasting all of the like light little details about her is this like giant 40K ass armor that's like got like spider web spikes and shit coming out of it in all directions. And she
Mm-hmm.
just has like the biggest broadsword. And
Hell yeah.
just like, yeah, no, I saw it and I was like, yes, this is, I have to write this. This is me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but so there's also she's also wearing this crown with this glowing green gem in it. And that glowing green gem is basically like the focal point of the whole book for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like it took over in some ways kind of like I wish it had taken over more. But like basically the glowing green gem is occupied by a demon, and so a significant part of the book is her like I'll say conferencing with this particular demon, and like
Mm-hmm.
she is self-aware enough to know that like she should not take him at face value. She knows
Uh-huh.
that this demon is not what he claims to be, but he is obviously very powerful, and so like she's wants that power because she is essentially like been deposed, and like she has been kept in captivity for many years and has
Mm-hmm.
escaped that into this kind of sprawling adventure of dark fantasy that's sort of meant to be riffing on like Glen Cook and like Fritz Leiber at the same time. So
Mm-hmm.
like those are my touchstones. Like, does it feel
Yeah, I
like
was
one or
gonna
the other
say
of
if
them? Okay,
there's
we're on the right page.
yeah. I was getting some Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
I mean, I feel like if you don't get that from things that I write, I'm doing something wrong.
Uh-huh. I'm always
But
very glad that my dad gave me an education into sort of the classic sword and sorcery stuff very, I won't say very early on in my reading career, but I think after the first Discworld novel I read was Hogfather,
gotcha.
and then I read a
Good
few
starting
more
place.
random ones, and then started back at the beginning. And my dad was like, "Okay, you're gonna read the first few pages of The Color of Magic, and now you're going to read some Fritz Leiber, so you understand what's happening here, because the first couple of books are pastiche."
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
That's a very succinct assessment of that particular segment. It was Bravd and the Weasel, I think,
Uh
are the
huh.
characters from yeah. Yeah, I oh man. I love Fafhrd and the Grey Mousers so much. They're just
Yeah.
they're two fellas that live very close to my heart. As horrible and weird as they both are.
Uh
Like I
huh.
can't help it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that we've talked about quite a number of things that you do love. Is there anything in Shepherd and Shadow that you are just so excited for readers to get to?
Oh, yes. So the whole genesis of this book, because I sincerely set out for Bringer of the Scourge to be a one and done standalone. I
Sure,
was very
yeah.
determined for there to be a real ending. It has a real ending. I promise you. If you buy Bringer of the Scourge and you read it, it has a complete ending, the end. But there's a big but. I left enough thread that at one point I want to say in like December, like
Mm-hmm.
in the like I finally finished everything I need to do for the year and I don't have to do anything at all ever. I had one of those like bolt upright at 3 in the morning. Oh no, I have to write this book.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the genesis of Shepherd and Shadow. So, the
That do
one
be
of I'm
happening.
sorry. Was it?
That do be happening to us.
Oh, it's every time. I have like just the evilest ideas when I am desperately trying to sleep. But yeah, so this one was very loud and was very much like, but what about Marin Tavat? And so that's basically what happened there. So Marin is one of the point of view characters in Bringer of the Scourge,
Hmm.
and in the interest of full disclosure, he was not meant to survive the first book.
Ha.
I feel like this is reflected in my marketing copy, but he there are events that happen that make it very clear that he is is not intending to wake up in this particular
Hmm.
instance. And so he's a wizard of questionable ability. I will call it that. He does not know or understand really the extent of what he is or is not able to do because he has been in a cult for like
Oh.
10 years. And I will say like there's a certain amount of like Bringer of the Scourge that is him sort of slowly soft deprogramming, but by the end
Hmm.
of the book he's by no means like a rational regular person who like understands things in a normal way. He very
Right.
much is still like, ah, yes, you have been in a cult since you were 17 years old. And that cult told you some things that are true and some things that are not so true.
Uh,
And the way in which those things were true is probably not the way they were intended to be. Um,
hmm.
and so that's sort of the genesis of that book. So it follows immediately on the events of the end of Bringer. So I don't want to talk too much about it just in case like someone
Sure,
doesn't want
yeah.
to be spoiled, but like come on, like a series works like that. So
Yeah.
but so essentially it's uh the follow-on adventures of the immediate aftermath of Bringer and sort of him learning how to embrace the person that he is and also like take accountability for some of that. Like both of
Nice.
those it feels like a like the reason I was like, "Oh, I have to write it" is very much like, "Oh, it's not just like one thing. There's like several layers here that I have to unpick for all of it." So,
Uh-huh. Well,
um
we love that for him.
yes. I mean, it's very miserable for him also.
Uh-huh, yeah. I mean, isn't that the point of writing a book?
Oh, yes. Yes. It's just like usually you don't have to depict that much blood loss.
Uh,
Anyway,
sometimes
details,
the poor little
details.
meow meow has to bleed.
Yes. So, Chekhov's bleeding mage. Um
Oh, if I did like episode titles that weren't just, who's on and what the work is that we're talking about, that would be it for
Chekhov's
sure.
bleeding mage.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to steal it actually, I think, for a newsletter.
Perfect. I'm glad somebody will use it.
Yes. I think it'll work well.
Fabulous. Um, so The Shepherd in Shadow coming
Mhm.
out very shortly. Definitely buy it from your preferred bookseller as available. Uh, there is something else I've heard tell briefly that is hitting crowdfunding very soon. Can you tell us a little bit about Beating Hearts and Battle Axes?
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Alrighty. So, about a year ago, Oliver Brackenbury, who is the publisher at New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine and of the forthcoming imprint Brackenbury books,
Mm-hmm.
started to ask me about my feelings about editing a collection of sword and sorcery and romance. And I said, well, that would be fantastic. I would love to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we actually started from a point of like, well, maybe it'll be a special issue of the magazine, question mark, question mark. And that didn't really like it was sort of like it feels like it would be a lot of crowdfunding for that, and it would be
Mm-hmm.
like because they have such a specific niche already, like this is like a niche of a niche, like what are we going to do there? And ultimately because he has also got some other works in the pipeline, which I don't know how public they are, so I will not talk too detailed about them just yet, but so there is reason for us to put forward as the first book for Brackenbury Books this anthology called Beating Hearts and Battle Axes. We decided for this one that it would probably be a little easier for us to manage if we went in with all of our authors kind of ready to roll rather than doing
Mm-hmm.
submissions. So unfortunately, I won't be doing submissions for this, but if you buy a whole lot of it, we'll
Yeah.
probably do another volume. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so we approached three authors from sort of like I'll call it the New Edge Sword and Sorcery stable.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them, but not all of them, had written at least one story for New Edge. So we had an idea of their baseline, and then Oliver allowed me to fill in the other three people. I don't know if we're doing the announcements of the specific individuals yet, um,
Sure.
but I will. You know what? I will do it, and then I will just tell you if you have to cut it. Truly, like I cannot express to you enough exactly how much all of these stories kick ass.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah,
I'm
I'm
saving
like,
myself the work if I have to cut this out later, but uh, if I have to cut that previous part out later, but that selection of authors kicks ass so hard.
I'm very pleased. Everybody has handed in work that I'm very excited about, and I still have to go back and do like I'm at that like slightly crazed point of like I have imbibed most of the stories. There's still two that are like basically I
Mm-hmm.
tried to pace everything so that I'd have like people coming in at different times. And that worked
Uh-huh.
out great, except that then I got really like unbelievably raunchy food poisoning. So I'm
Yeah.
like behind the gun on everything right now.
Yeah.
But in general, so yeah, so I had planned things perfectly to have like two stories going at a time, and that's mostly working. But anyways, so yeah, so that whole process of assembling an anthology where like you have to have all of the pieces kind of like slowly colliding against each other so you can figure out like where does this fit and how does it fit and what are the
Mm-hmm.
specifics. And I feel like I'm so happy that so many people heard me say I'm working on an anthology for sword and sorcery and romance and said not just yeah, but like hell yeah. I also art directed this one, and that was like a very new experience for me as
Oh,
a as an
nice.
as an anthology editor. Like I've done a couple of anthology projects, none of them that have gone to fruition yet, unfortunately, just because of the vagaries of publishing have
Yep.
attacked me many times. But in this particular instance, I was able to art direct, which was a whole new experience for me. So, Oliver and I had a very long meeting where we like went back and forth about what we wanted and what we didn't want, and uh, I think probably my highlight from that was we were going over like a long list of don'ts, and at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the long list of don'ts, he goes, "Yeah, and I don't want oh, what's his name? Julie Bell's husband,
Oh, uh-huh.
who is Boris Vallejo." Which like for sword and sorcery and romance, like I completely understand that. That's very much like that's all cheesecake, no action. We wanted action. We wanted like we
Mm-hmm.
didn't want just like titty stuff, but we wanted like competent physicality as well. And I feel like our cover illustrator, who is M.E. Morgan or Morlev Art,
Oh,
um
yeah.
extremely delivered. Like I gave her such a like I gave her such a like kind of soup on of stuff that we like were hoping to see, and
Mm-hmm.
like let her loose with the rest, and she completely delivered. It was so good. I was absolutely just blown away from like thumbnails on. I was just like every time I got an email from her, I was like, yeah.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that was a fun and new experience, and I learned a lot from doing that. The full cover art should be available on our backer kit page, which our backer kit page is currently on like They're like pre-launch page, so like you can
Hmm.
sign up to find out when the launch is, and that's the current URL we've got acting for now. Which I sent you like a very long, garbled, horrible link. I
Yeah, it will be
desperately
in the
need to
show
get.
notes. Listeners, don't worry about it. Just click.
I definitely gave Oliver I I've told him a lot of other things to do, but short link is one of the things I have not gotten him to do yet.
Hmm. I mean,
In
there's
any
always
case,
so many things to do.
yeah. But yeah, so this project has been a delight and it's been a long time coming, but until we had the once we had the like insane success of the February backer kit event for the magazine, that was
Hmm.
basically sort of like what unlocked our ability to kind of do the rest of this project. And so suddenly it became like, okay, we got to get this rolling like now.
Nice.
So that'll be crowdfunding starting June 20th. And there will be some cool secrets and treats in that particular month. Um, and
Excellent.
I'm so looking forward to it, but I'm also like I have the 1,000 yard stare of someone who's almost
Uh,
ready to do a crowdfund.
yeah. Uh,
Oh,
so final thing, which I did not prepare you for beforehand,
no worries.
but you've heard the show before. You know how this goes. Is there anything in the broader media landscape that you've been super enjoying and you want our listeners to know about?
Oh, I feel like anything that I have is something your listeners are already onto, but I will say that we have been obsessed with X-Men 97 in our house.
Oh hell yeah!
That's like I think that's probably like it's that in like Forged in Fire, man. Those are the things I watch.
Hmm. That is entirely valid. And honestly, like if Fortune Fire had existed in 1997,
Oh, you would be a bladesmith. I know it.
yeah.
I don't even have to question. I'm like, of course. Like honestly, the fact that you aren't is sort of just like, wow, that is like an alternate universe.
Uh huh.
I can see it so clearly.
Yeah, picked up archery instead.
It will kill. Oh, my mother actually pulled that on me one time. We had taken her to Lowe's because she desperately wanted a broom for her porch.
Oh,
And she's so my mother uses a wheelchair because she only has one leg and really like a quarter of a leg. But
mm-hmm.
so she really wanted a push broom so she could control the amount of leaf litter on her entire porch in Pittsburgh, which Pittsburgh is like that.
Yeah, Pittsburgh do be like that.
Anyways, so I took her to Lowe's. We got the broom home, and I came out to see how she was doing with it, and asked her, what do you think, et cetera, et cetera. And she just turned to me and looked over her shoulder and said, "It will kill," like Doug Marcaida. And I just like lost it. I was like,
Oh,
okay,
beautiful.
clearly I've been watching too much of my TV around you. I will have to change up the regimen a little bit. But
Yep.
her timing was impeccable.
I love this for her.
It's a good broom, man.
Yeah.
Strongly recommend
Oh,
whatever blue broom they have at Lowe's. It's fantastic. It will kill.
fabulous. Uh,
Alrighty.
well, finally, before we get going, Jay, where can our listeners find you elsewhere?
Righty. So I am at JX Wolf on almost any platform that matters. That's
And
J A
some of them that
Y.
don't, probably.
Well, many of them that don't. Most of them that don't. JAY like the bird, X like uh multiplication sign, and then
Uh,
wolf like the animal, WOLF. And my author persona can be found everywhere as M. Daniel McDowell. And that is exactly what it sounds like. No periods, no spaces, no etc. for the most part. Um,
fabulous.
but yeah.
Well, listeners, as always, links will be in the show notes. I highly recommend Jay as a follow. Like I said at the beginning, I've been following them for God knows how long. Who knows? Time is
I think
fake.
it's been at least a decade, which is sort of
It's
wild to think
probably
about.
been at least a decade, which is absolutely wild to me.
Yeah. I
Like,
definitely sort of like that was when I first started actively pursuing like publication Twitter was
mm-hmm.
in like 2013, 2014, and that is where I have where I met a lot of wonderful charming folk like yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I do not miss Twitter, but I do miss that era of publishing Twitter and the ways
Yes.
that it was.
Yes. It is like it's very hard to like mourn a liminal space, but I absolutely
Uh,
do. There was like such hope and promise in that place, and then it
it
all died.
was. Yeah.
And it was shocking how quickly, because realistically speaking, like publishing Twitter as like a positive space died in like really like 2016.
Yeah.
It was never the same. And so like yeah, yeah, it's rough.
It's rough. It is rough out there, folks. Well, Jay, it has been such a delight having you on. Just absolutely impeccable vibes for the first episode of this Pride Month 2024.
Aw. Well, I'm honored and flattered to be here. I thank you so much for asking me. It's very exciting and I have officially run out of words.
Absolutely. I succeeded.
Yes. We
Oh,
100%ed.
listeners, stick around in 2 weeks when there will be a guest. I don't know who it is yet. I have been in the minds of having an autistic brain and stuff, I guess. But it'll be good, I promise. Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Lillian Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Blue Sky at Trunkcast, and I post at HBBisnieks. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.